The Cannibal Dragon, the oldest and most dangerous wild Targaryen dragon we will see next season. Hi, this is Simon Candlish, and welcome to Marvelous Videos. In songs, dragons are majestic creatures that are both wondrous and terrifying. They once flew all over the known world, roosted atop the high tower before it was created, ruled the skies over Essos for 5 millennia, and destroyed countless civilizations, serving as the preferred steeds of the Valyrian dragon lords. When dragons came to Westeros, some might have taken that as an omen of destruction, with the doom of Valyria still fresh in many people's minds, while others regarded the kingdoms of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men to be the site of the new Valyria. Great beasts like Balerion, the Black Dread, and nimbler yet equally deadly beauties like Baelor Targaryen's Moondancer, whom we will see soon enough in House of the Dragon, gave people heart and took rebellion out of their minds. But there is one dragon who all, even the Targaryens, regarded to be an omen of death and everything taboo about the hidden arts of the Dragon Lords. Though he doesn't have a name, men fishing the waters of Dragonstone have taken to calling him the Cannibal, and this is his origins explored. Also, spoiler warning, because there will be a lot of those in this video. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you, and let's begin. Etymology and birthplace. As you guys might know from our previous origin videos, the Targaryen dragons, go watch them all if you haven't. A dragon's name is influenced by one of two schools of thought. The first plays homage to the Targaryen Valyrian heritage, naming their dragons after their gods of old Valyria. Balerion is said to have been named after one of the Valyrian gods, and most recently, Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen named her yellow steed Syrax, in honor of one of the Dragon Lord's goddesses. The other is more personalized, giving a dragon a name based on their appearance or something that their rider holds dear to themselves. For instance, King Aenys Targaryen and Queen Alysanne Targaryen's dragons were named after their coloring, Quicksilver and Silverwing respectively. In this regard, the Cannibal might have the simplest name to understand because his name reflects what he does. He cannibalizes his fellow dragons living in the Dragonmount. We will explore this baleful beast naming and preferred eating habits a little bit later on, for it is his birth that is most intriguing when we talk about the Cannibal. Why is that, you ask? Well, because it's possible that the Cannibal was born even before any of the other dragons you will see in House of the Dragon, and yes, that includes Vhagar. The Cannibal is said to be the oldest and the largest of the 3 completely wild dragons that reside within the Dragonmount at the start of the Dance of the Dragons. A wild dragon is essentially a dragon that has managed to reach adulthood without ever bonding to a rider in its life. Dragons who lose their riders at some point in their lives also technically fall in this category, but because they have a more intimate knowledge of human behavior, they tend to not lash out in their presence. Such dragons are also called castle dragons because of the fact that they've known a previous rider and have experienced confinement within their royal abodes. The most well-known of the 3 wild dragons that lived on Dragonstone at the start of Dance Hatched, when the old king was young, i.e. early on in the reign of King Jaehaerys I. Now, Jaehaerys started ruling in his own right when he became of age in 50 AC, but he had already ascended to the throne in 48 AC and spent 2 years under the guidance of his hand and his regent. If we are to include Jaehaerys' minority into this scenario, then it is possible that this popular wild dragon was born anywhere between 48 to 50 AC, while 50 to 55 AC also seems like a good enough time frame for their birth. This particular dragon would, as a consequence, be at least 70 years old at the time of the dance, which means that the Cannibal was at least 71 at that time. And we would venture so far as to say that the Cannibal was much older than that, because he is consistently described as the oldest and largest, or the 3 wild dragons, and the other 2 are considerably smaller and less feral than him. Some small folk who have fished the waters of Dragonstone for centuries claim that the Cannibal lived there even before the Targaryens arrived, but that is a claim that we can choose to ignore as myth. This is because the Targaryens arrived on Dragonstone in 114 BC, and if the cannibal lived on Dragonstone before this, then he would have to be the largest dragon known to mankind in 129 AC. But we know this is not the case because the only dragon recorded to have died of old age is Balerion the Black Dread, who was at least 208 years old when he died in 94 AC. 35 years before the dance. The cannibal being born before the arrival of the Targaryens, or born of a dragon's egg that did not belong to them, can explain why he earned his sobriquet. But if you ask us, it was most likely the latter. Even at the best of times, a dragon's egg hatching is a tricky thing, and them growing into full-size adults is trickier still. If the cannibal belonged to a clutch that was lain by a dragon other than the ones that the Targaryen family brought with them to Dragonstone, his age and disposition would both make sense. However, seeing as both of those things are next to impossible, as his egg would have turned to stone had it not been attained to in time, it is much more likely that the cannibal was born from one of the clutches of the eggs that hatched during the Century of Blood. The Targaryens were lords of Dragonstone for 114 years before they became the lords of the Seven Kingdoms, and during that time many dragons came and went. They arrived with 5 dragons, including Balerion, but by the time Aegon launched his conquest, 4 of them had died and 2 new dragons had taken their place in the form of Meraxes and Vhagar. Both of these she-dragons were known to have been born at around the halfway point of the Century of Blood, so it is possible that the cannibal was born along with them. That would put his age at around the same as Vhagar's, who is 180 years old at the time the dance ends, making the cannibal possibly the second oldest and second largest dragon in existence at the outbreak of the Civil War. Taking into account all of these factors, we can safely establish the Dragonmont on Dragonstone as the birthplace of the monstrosity that is called the Cannibal. But now that we have narrowed down his age after a fashion and established his birthplace, let's get into his early years, because though we know nothing of the cannibal's life at times, his habits give us intriguing insight into the reason behind a lack of dragons in the world today. The colour of the herds, the cannibal's life in the Dragonmont. Cannibalism is something most of us, save for those of you who unironically enjoyed the new Netflix movie on Jeffrey Dahmer, have come to despise, and rightfully so. The very thought of eating another creature of the same species is both disturbing and disgusting, but nature does not seem to agree with us. Cannibalism is extremely prevalent in the animal kingdom, and it's practiced by some 90% of Earth's aquatic ecology. It is noted mostly in invertebrates, such as snails and worms and the like. And who here has not seen a black widow spider mating video out of sheer curiosity? The point is, while eating someone of the same species is gross and sinful according to most religions, it is something of a common occurrence in nature, so it makes sense that the cannibal would also partake in this practice. This dragon in particular practiced size-specific cannibalism because it was known that the cannibal preferred feeding on smaller, younger dragons and even dragon eggs. Size-specific cannibalism is something that is extremely common. Worm species like the eelworm, and we know that the Targaryen dragons are constantly described as worm-like or serpentine in the books. In fact, Archmaester Gyldayn even comments that when 2 dragons fight each other, it is like watching 2 worms fight with teeth and claw, for dragon flame is not an ideal weapon choice against another wielded as well. Because the cannibal possessed such a taste for eating his own kind, we can take it to mean that he was culling the hatchings of Dragonstone way before the dragon pit was even created. And if that is indeed the case, then his existence itself would explain why there are so few dragons in the possession of the Targaryens. Because if you think about things logically, there should be far more than 20 living dragons at the start of the Targaryen Civil War in 129 AC. The histories tell us that the Targaryens arrived in Dragonstone in 114 AC and ruled Westeros for nearly 300 years after Aegon's conquest. For 130 of those years, they rode dragons, meaning that for roughly 2.5 centuries, the skies over the Blackwater Rush had been accustomed to feeling leathern wings beating upon their clouds. Before 129 AC, we know of only 3 dragons who died. Meraxes, shot through the eye with a scorpion bolt at Hellholt in 10 AC, Quicksilver, killed by Balerion in the Battle Beneath the God's Eye in 43 AC, and Balerion, whose death we have already mentioned. If you take those three into account as well, then Westeros has only ever known 23 dragons who lived long enough for men to know their names. For out of the 20 that took part in the dance, 3 weren't even big enough to be ridden to war. And what's more intriguing is the fact that most of these 20 dragons were born after Jaehaerys became king and the Dragon Pit was completed. Before the completion of the Dragon Pit, 170 years of Targaryen rule had brought forth only 10 dragons of repute. The 70 years that followed its construction saw just as many dragons born and live into infamy, if not more. While it is true that the Targaryens maintained 2 hatcheries and nurseries after the Dragon Pit was finished, one in Dragonstone and the other at King's Landing, and that both of them thrived more often than not, it is only after the shifting of the dragons to their great stone stable that we see them live long enough to have a song written about them. Had they been allowed to continue to lair in the Dragonmont, they would have likely died as young dragons, or as hatchlings even, because that is where the Cannibal comes in. While we are by no means suggesting that he is the only reason there aren't any more dragons in the world today, he is a major contributing factor to the fact. It is often said that the Targaryens are more gods than men, that the blood of the dragon runs thicker than naught else, and that a Targaryen is the closest thing to a living dragon you would have seen following the dance. In A Feast for Crows, Jaime recalls a time when he and Jon Darry were standing guard at Queen Rhaella Targaryen's door when the Mad King entered her chambers and claimed his wedding rights after giving his mace and dagger hand to the flames. Jaime spoke up to his older peer and told him that the King's Guard is also sworn to protect the King's family, to which the older knight grimly replied, "Not from him." Targaryens are the closest living kin to the dragons at that point, and ravaging their own is not something the Dragon Lords were averse to. Even in Old Valyria, the 40 families of the Freehold often plotted against each other, assassinating one member or the other and rising and falling in endless power struggle for 5,000 years. It would seem as though cannibalism is in their blood, given how many Targaryens turned into kinslayers, and thus it should not at all be surprising that the cannibal was what he was. He can be seen as a representation of the unbridled danger that a wild dragon poses to everyone, even his own kind. Though it is inaccurate to attribute the low number of Targaryen dragons just to him, it would be just as inaccurate to discount him from that conversation entirely. The only dragons that would dare to roost at Dragonmont after being hatched were ones who had grown large enough to defend themselves against the cannibal's savagery, and only after they had lost their riders to calamities man-made or otherwise. Cannibalism only occurs in nature when a creature is finding it difficult to forage for food, needs to thin out the booming population, or has acquired a taste for their own kind. In the case of the cannibal, the latter 2 reasons seem to play more of a role than foraging, as the lands in and around Dragonstone had ample livestock sufficient for a dragon's roasted feast. The last reason seems to have become the main reason for his continued practice of cannibalism, as by the time the Dance of the Dragon had arrived, he was known more by his fearsome reputation than his appearance, though it is not as if that also does not play a role in the story. The black and green menace of Dragonstone, the cannibal's role in the Dance of the Dragons. All of Westeros has only ever known one black dragon in their lifetimes. That dragon would be Balerion, the Black Dread, the scarlet and night black mount of Aegon the Conqueror, who burned Harrenhal during the conquest and countless castles and towns during the Faith Militant Uprising. In recent times, Daenerys' eldest dragon, Drogon, is said to be Balerion come again. But apart from these 2, no other black dragon was known to history, except the cannibal. Black as coal, with menacing green eyes, it is hard to believe that George R.R. Martin was not thinking about something in particular when he told us of this dragon's colouring, because even amongst their wormy ilk, black scales are particularly rare, and a black and green dragon can only be called the rarest by that metric. Balerion can be thought of as the very personification of fire and blood. His black scales and scarlet markings showed you the end result of what his flames could accomplish 10 times out of 10. If we are to contrast this with the cannibal, then we should have known he would be feral by the colour of his eyes, because emerald green is also how the substance known as wildfire is described. The substance is fickle, known to burn for way longer than any regular fire would, can stay lit on water, and is only beaten in heat by a dragon's breath. But wildfire is also used as a descriptor for characters whose personality lends itself to psychopathy, like King Aerys Targaryen II and Queen Regent Cersei Lannister. In this aspect, we can think of Balerion as the fire and blood representation, and the cannibal as being the all-wildfire, explaining away his feral nature even more. Recall that old sailor's proverb for wildfire that Davos thinks of to himself, because it will come into play in a few moments. But there is another significance we can attach to the cannibal's colouring, and this one comes from far off in the east, Asshai specifically. From the first book, we've been told that through the Valyrians were the first and only race of men to have subdued dragons to their will. Those great winged beasts actually originated in Asshai. We have no time to get into this question entirely, but we will quickly mention that the cannibal's colouring is also reminiscent of the River Ash, an accursed body of water that flows through the Vale of Shadows and into the last city in the known world. The ash is said to be as black as tar, even when the rays of the sun hit its surface, and at night, its waters glow green with prosperence. We don't want to state the obvious here, but given the fact that the city of Asshai is known for the open practice of necromancy, shadow binding, and such dark arts, the connections here seem less random than George makes them out to be in his interviews. The cannibal has comfortably spent a century terrorizing not just the small folk of Dragonstone, but its more fierce denizens as well. And the latter is how he comes into play during the Dance of the Dragons. When Prince Jacaerys Velaryon calls out for the Dragon Seed, if you don't know what those are, check out our video on the Dragon Seeds on our channel. Doesn't step forward to claim all the wild dragons lairing in the Dragonmont, except the cannibal. Making his lair at the back of the volcano's eastern side, it is written in fire and blood that no one was foolish enough to try to claim the cannibal. Those who had tried to do so in decades past were only survived by their bones, which littered the black and green menace's lair. Regardless of this warning, some people did try to claim him, thinking they knew what the heart of the dragon truly desires. They did not return from their quest. The cannibal made himself known nonetheless during the sowing and lived up to his ferocious reputation. When a dragon seed called Silver Dennis tried to claim the mud-brown dragon called Sheep Stealer, he ended up losing an arm to the mutton-loving beast instead. As his sons tried to staunch the wound, the dragon moved in for the kill, but couldn't finish the job. That's because the cannibal had already sensed Silver Denny's peril and descended upon him and his kin, devouring them while driving Sheep Stealer away. The fact that he was able to basically shoo away a 70-year-old dragon and claim its kill is all you need to know about why the people who entered his lair hoping to claim him never returned. Understandably, out of all the wild dragons that reside in the Dragonmont, the cannibal was one of the two not to have been claimed, and the other dragon that went unclaimed would pull him into a mystery that ends up proving fatal to Rhaenyra and her cause in the most unexpected of ways. In 130 AC, after the dance was well and truly underway, the fishermen of Dragonstone reported a curious death. A dead dragon had been spotted at the base of the Dragonmont, burnt and broken, torn and partially devoured. The fishermen who attended to those waters for decades know him nonetheless. It was the other dragon that went unclaimed during the sowing, a shy grey beast called Grey Ghost. When the matter was brought to the Dragonstone's castellan, Sir Robert Quince, he immediately pointed the finger at the cannibal, and just to play devil's advocate for a bit, he wasn't completely unjustified in his assumption. Grey Ghost was significantly younger and smaller than the cannibal, precisely the kind of prey he loved to descend upon. It's possible that the two even had some kind of history between them, given how quick Sir Robert was to blame the cannibal for his death. But if he had paid attention to his subjects instead of established facts, he'd have been able to not only avoid his own death, but also that of his sworn queen. For sailors out of the Najarian insisted that the scales of the dragon fighting the Grey Ghost were golden, and we're going to leave it at that, lest we spoil the surprise altogether. Gotta leave something for series 2 as well, right? The only thing that we can tell you is that Lady Baela Targaryen was ready to investigate the matter, child or not. Prince Daemon's daughter was just as fiery as he was, and was willing to risk crossing paths with the biggest and the baddest of the wild dragons, reasoning that he, Moondancer, could easily outpace the cannibal if it came to that. And while that would have been a face-off for the ages, sadly, it would never come to pass. Besides teaching a few dragon seeds the true cost of messing with a wild dragon, the cannibal would not be seen for the rest of the dance, and even beyond it, for after the Targaryen civil war was concluded, the dragon was said to have simply vanished. Some claim that the cannibal flew out of his lair in the Dragonmont after Lord Corlys Velaryon passed away and gave him a salute. But this is unlikely, as the maesters rightfully argue he'd have more likely eaten the sea snake's corpse than honour it. Despite being one of the 4 dragons known to have made it out of the dance unharmed, the cannibal would never be seen over the skies of the Dragonmont ever again, nor would his body be found in that dreary volcanic fortress the Targaryens called home. The cannibal's disappearance coincided with the decline of magic in the world, and we think he is going to be a similar herald in House of the Dragon. When will we see the cannibal in House of the Dragon? Showrunners Ryan Condal and Miguel Sapochnik had us very excited when they told us we'd be seeing 17 dragons in total when all was said and done, with 9 of those appearing in the first season, because 17 is not 20. We thought that they had decided to cut out the wild dragons from the equation entirely, so you can imagine our relief when we learnt that not only have the designs for the 3 wild dragons been created, they are also some of the favourites of the House of Dragons team's VFX department. Because if you guys are not privy to this by now, the show tells you that there are 3 broad types of Targaryen dragons: horsish, like Syrax, wolfish, like Caraxes, and dinosaurish, like Meles, Seasmoke, Drogon, and so forth. Given that dragons are weapons of warfare, it makes sense that they were bred for specific purposes by their riders. But a wild dragon is exactly that, a wild animal with no specific purpose. Sheepstealer, Grey Ghost, and the Cannibal have never known a rider and have far less human contact than all other Targaryen dragons combined. As a consequence, not only are their personalities different, so are their appearances. From what we know so far about this wild trio, each of them will look unique and distinct from their stable-friendly counterparts, and we will only have to wait a year to see them. The wild dragons have been confirmed as appearing in Season 2 of House of the Dragon, which itself might be 3 to 4 seasons long at best. This means that both the sowing of the dragon seeds and the mystery of Grey Ghost's death, events in which the cannibal is involved, can end up being depicted on screen as early as 2023. This would make the cannibal an instant fan favourite upon his arrival, if the reactions for Caraxes are anything to go by. And perhaps we will get more information on his heritage in the process, as House of the Dragon is in a unique position to both confirm and deny the speculation that the cannibal belonged to the Dragon Lords who sold Dragonstone to the Targaryens. Whether they do that or not remains to be seen. But what we can guarantee to you is the fact that Season 2 of House of the Dragon will most likely introduce you to all the 17 dragons that are involved in the story of the dance, and it will be this black and green menace that will steal the show despite not even fighting in the war. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.